if this session here on how to be a better libertarian, win friends and influence people, where we're joined by Ron Nehring, Julie Borowski and Brittany Hunter, sounds like your jam, stay right where you are because we're about to say hello. Thank you to all three of you for joining us. We're very, very happy to have you here, joining us from all over the world. Now, how to be a better libertarian? In what context would we, what sort of training can you provide? How do you make somebody a better libertarian? Take it away. We have a speaker, or is my audio not working?
That's very ominous. How to be a better libertarian.
Yes, and then there's silence.
No, it means we're so good we don't need any more gardens.
Okay, so did we have Ron lined up to go first, I believe?
I'm ready to
be there? Fantastic. Ron,
beautiful.
There you are. We apologise for that break in transmission, everybody. We have Ron on the line. Ron, talk to us. What do you think about how to be a better libertarian, win friends and influence people?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join all of you for this wonderful conference. I'm so sorry that we're not able to do it in person, but I look forward to participating next year under better circumstances. I'm coming to you today from deep behind the Iron Curtain in the People's Democratic Republic of California. And I put a couple of slides together for this presentation that you should be able to see on your screen right now on the subject of persuasive communications. And I would start with the notion that being a better libertarian means being a more effective and persuasive one. And there's so much need around the world for libertarian ideas in government and politics. And the more libertarians we have who are being as effective as possible, moving that ball forward, being as persuasive as possible, demonstrating the qualities that people look for in a leader so that they can assume positions of leadership to put their ideas into action, I think is really vital, not only for the success of a movement, but for success globally. I'm going to walk through a couple of slides here and in the limited time that I have today. And I want to start with, when we talk about being more persuasive, we first have to understand how people make judgments and choices. It's not just about what is my message going to be today, but understanding how people reach the conclusions that they do about people and about ideas. And I want to start with showing this video. And this video has nothing to do with politics, but I'm going to ask you, as you watch this video, if you had to conclude which of the two people in the video was the conservative, which one would it be? Keep that in mind as you watch this 30-second spot.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
Ready to get started?
Well, not quite. Got a lot to do. What's your big plan?
I might make a home movie or maybe create a website, try out my built-in camera. I can do it all right out of the box, so what about you?
Well, first I got to download those new drivers, and I got to erase the trial software that came on my hard drive.
Sweet.
And I've got a lot of manuals to read.
You know, it sounds like you have a lot of stuff to do before you do any stuff, so I'm just going to get started because I'm kind of excited. Let me know when you're ready.
Actually, the rest of me's in some other boxes, so I'll meet up with you later.
So I've shown that video literally around the world, and this is typically where in a normal session we'd get a lot of audience engagement going. But the overwhelming majority of people will conclude that the person on the left is probably the conservative. And then we'll dig a little deeper into why. And some people may conclude that it's because of the visuals, what they see, how each of the people in the ad is dressed, the color of the box, while other people might talk about what the speakers actually talked about in the ad. The PC guy on the left in the brown box is very bogged down in process, while the person on the right is more action oriented and so on. And another group of people might point to their behavior. The person on the left never gets out of the box, is a little bit more awkward. The person on the right, a little more active, actually jumping out of the box and so on. And so we see people drawing conclusions based upon three different sets of inputs that they're getting: the behavioral, the visual, and the verbal. And then I'll ask people, well, which took you longer? Did it take you longer to draw your conclusion, or did it take you longer to come up with the reasons why you support that conclusion? And overwhelmingly, people will come to realize that they actually drew the conclusion first, and then they were able to come up with the reasons why afterward. Now, this is really interesting because it runs counter to how very often those of us who are conservatives and libertarians will pride ourselves that, well, as a very rational human being, I carefully evaluate all of the inputs and the factors involved in the decision, and only at that point do I then reach a rational conclusion and so on. And the reality is that most people do not reach their conclusions that way. And what you find is that we've now discovered the difference between intuition and reasoning. And very often we'll look at the world in terms of, well, the rational versus the emotional, Kirk versus Spock, etc. But I would say that this is a better way to look at things for the purposes of our discussion today. Intuition is how most people draw most conclusions in their lives and in their day. Intuition is when you recognize something, you make a judgment, you make a choice, and you do so automatically without even thinking about it. Whereas reasoning we tend to use only when we're either persuading or when we're explaining, and then it's a conscious act. It's not something that is automatic. There's a big difference between the two, and so it's vital for us to reach people on an intuitive level. I'm going to walk you through that in just a moment. In terms of where people are drawing their conclusions based upon, take a look at this. 55% of how people draw their conclusions or have their perceptions influenced is the visual. It's what they see. It's not what they hear at all. It's what they see. And that's why we have to pay special attention when we're engaged in the public policy arena on the visuals. That might mean if you're holding a press conference, don't hold your boring press conference in a boring conference room, providing no visuals whatsoever, because television, for example, doesn't want to cover that. That makes for terrible pictures and so on. The visuals are vitally important. Social media is overwhelmingly driven by visuals. If you want to test that, tweet something out without a picture, tweet the same thing out with a picture, watch how much more engagement you get when there's a picture involved. 38% of how people make judgments is based on the vocal. That's not even what people say, it's how it's said. That your tone of voice, your mannerisms when you're speaking, etc. That can add a great deal of power to what it is that you're saying. And 7% of what people base their perception on is the verbal. And very often people who are involved in the public policy world, people who are particularly new to the public policy world, will put all of their emphasis on the verbal and being able to effectively cite Ayn Rand or being able to effectively cite, Milton Friedman or whatever. And that's great. We love that at conferences. But in the real world, we have to make sure that we're firing on all cylinders and that we're influencing people visually, vocally, as well as verbally. In terms of which is more powerful, intuition or reasoning, this picture would illustrate the intuition is the elephant in this picture. It's big, it's dominant, it's going to go where it wants to go. The rider is more like the reasoning. It's more sophisticated, better vision in terms of seeing, further ahead, maybe thinking strategically, etc. But it really is the elephant that's in charge. And that intuition is an automatic response to the things that we recognize, overwhelmingly visually. So if you want to make your case on a public policy issue, do you have an opportunity to make that visually? If you're running into people at a conference, what does the visual about how you're presenting yourself tell people? Does that tell people that you're a worthwhile individual to spend time with? Or are you sending a signal that there are other people in the 1,000 plus others who are there who people should spend time on? People just make decisions using those shortcuts, and we want to make sure that we're transmitting the right messages on every level. So how the two work together, how your intuition and reasoning work together, can be illustrated like this. Let's say you're out, you're attending some event in person, and you're going to be the guy in the white shirt, right? Let's say you're going to be home very, very late. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to recognize that this is going to be unpleasant. And so what do? As you're heading home, you call upon the reasoning part of your mind in order to come up with all the reasons why you shouldn't be yelled at. Well, I was at this great Friedman conference and I learned so much. It's going to help my career. It's going to help, so on and so forth. This is how the two work together. And in strategic communications, we only have a limited bandwidth, a limited amount of time that people are willing to give us in order to make our case. That, whether you're in a political campaign or you're trying to affect something happening at a local city council, you only have a narrow period of time. Nobody wants to hear the 20-minute explanation about why privatizing sidewalks in town is going to be the way to go. If it takes you 20 minutes to make your case, the vast majority of people will tune out by then. So we have to recognize that the advantage goes to the communicator who starts with the elephant on his or her side. The advantage goes to the communicator who can reach people intuitively rather than having to persuade them to reach a certain point. So we have to be sensitive to all the different types of signals that we're sending out to people. These are visual signals, behavioral signals, and then also things that are a bit more abstract, like reputation and associations. I can tell you that as a former elected official, if someone comes before the panel that I'm serving on and they have a strong reputation, they have strong affiliations, that's going to impact my perception and those of my colleagues as well. So when we're sending those signals out to people, whether that's how we're presenting or what we're talking about, all the visual, the verbal, the behavioral, when we send those signals out, there's going to be a response from the audience across a range. And that range is going to, this is not just binary, but there's going to be a range that goes between acceptance and rejection. And the ideal is that the person who we're communicating with just accepts what it is that we're saying intuitively, and we're off to the races. That's ideal. I live in a very conservative area here in California. They do exist about 30 miles from the coast. All of my neighbors here have a gun, a horse, and a pickup truck. And if I go from door to door and say, I'm Ron Nearing, I'm the conservative Republican candidate for whatever, they're all automatically going to be with me. But if I go on talk radio in the city of San Francisco and I start with that same message, hi, I'm Ron Nearing, I'm the conservative Republican candidate for whatever, then their reaction is going to be more toward rejection initially, if that's what I start with. And then I'm going to have to try to pull them over toward acceptance using every tool of reasoning that I have. This is called the intuitive pathway. And knowing your audience is something that's vitally important so that you can shape your presentation and you can shape your argument and you can shape which points you want to bring up in order to reach people intuitively. Whereas this is what we call the persuasive pathway. If someone initially rejects us, then we have to then try to pull them over and explain and persuade and get them over to our point of view. And we may never do that. The difference between the two is that this is cheap and easy, while this is expensive and hard. And what we often find that people who are new to politics and they're very passionate about their conservative or libertarian ideas, very often they will want to provoke a debate by going out with something that they know the audience is going to disagree with and then try to argue them down. That is a prescription for disaster. Nobody succeeds in public policy by doing that. That is something which might be fun in an academic setting, but if you're trying to persuade people, we want to recognize that, number one, politics is 75% relationships and it's 25% everything else. And we start relationships over what we have in common, not what we don't have in common. So we want to look for those opportunities by knowing our audience, whether we're doing a one-on-one meeting with a donor to try to raise money for our cause, or whether we're getting up and speaking in front of a Lions Club. Understanding our audience so that we can reach them intuitively is key. So we want to, number one, reach people intuitively. Number two, we do that by building a relationship. Number three, we make the relationship, particularly at the beginning, about what we know we have in common, not what we don't have in common. Now, intuitively, there'll be some qualities that people will look for in a leader, and I'm going to walk through 5 of them in the couple minutes that I have left. There are 5 key qualities that people look for in a leader or in a communicator. Number 1 is to have vision. If leaders are expected to be able to describe their goal in visionary terms. And that means that, let's say you're a candidate for a local government office. What's your vision for that community? Not what your vision for the world is, not what your vision for the country is, but what's your vision for that particular community? So you have to make your philosophy and your issues relevant to your target audience. If I am running for my local planning group here in rural San Diego County, California, and I talk about how we have to, eliminate the import-export bank of the United States because it's a, crony capitalist, giveaway to, big corporations with lobbyists, I'm going to lose my audience. But instead, how can I take that philosophy of mine of limited government, free enterprise, etc., and make it relevant to my particular target audience? And we do that through what our vision is. But that is not enough. Number two is that leaders are expected to be able to turn vision into reality. So as you're communicating with people who you're seeking to persuade, perhaps to vote for you or support you or to build your credentials, what are some examples that you have where you've turned vision into reality, where you've gotten something done? This goes beyond academia. This is in a practical sense, and it doesn't have to be something that you did in politics. Well, I've never been elected to office before, so how can I do that? There are plenty of examples that you can draw on from your regular life before politics or before public policy that you can cite. So that's number two. Leaders can turn vision into reality. Number three, leaders demonstrate strength, and this is a critical quality that people look for. This is one which tends to be easier for men to communicate rather than for women. It can be a little bit trickier for women to do that. But on the flip side, leaders also have to demonstrate caring. And this is the area where most libertarians fall down. And the reason for that is that very often people who are articulating libertarian ideas will come across as, you're on your own. The market will decide. Oh, you're a handicapped person in a wheelchair and you can't get into any restaurants in your community. Who am I to use the power of the state to tell anyone that they have to accommodate handicapped people? The market will decide, and if not, I can't do anything for you. That's just how it tends to come across. And so do not concede the caring side of the argument in any public policy fight to the other team. It is incumbent upon you to demonstrate how your side, how your ideas, and whatever the fight is, that you're on the caring side, as opposed to conceding that to the other team. The people on the left will constantly hammer conservatives and libertarians on this point because we will leave ourselves vulnerable on it. Do not ever concede the caring side of the argument. Number five, leaders are honest. And number six, leaders are expected to treat people fairly. And this is where many libertarians have a great strength, and that is that by being so pro-free enterprise, but also pro-free market, we can very well articulate an anti-crony capitalist approach to government. Whereas there are some other people on the right who will fall into that trap. So just be aware of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in my breakout session later on today. I'm going to close up with this point, and that is that I'm going to give a book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt that I strongly recommend reading. What you have on the screen right now are 6 moral foundations that people will tend to tie, they will perceive issues and people based upon which of these moral foundations that are touched upon: caring, fairness, authority, sanctity, loyalty, and liberty. The key point that I would take away from here is that people on the left, their core equity is that they are more likely to be seen as caring and fair. And in any audience, people who are the swing part of that audience are going to tend to go for the side which they think most demonstrates caring and fairness. Do not ever concede that. Make sure that you're constantly defining your side and yourself, that you are on the side of caring and fairness. So, takeaways. Number 1, people make judgments intuitively. Number 2, people of different philosophies make judgments based upon different moral foundations. People on the center and the center left tend to look toward caring and fairness. You have to be on the side of caring and fairness in that type of fight. Tie your messages to the moral foundation of your particular audience. Do not ever concede the caring and fairness side of the fight. Cite theories, not stories. I'm sorry, let me say that right. Don't cite theories, cite stories. And that is that look for ways that you can communicate your ideas by tying them into a story that brings that story to life. There's always a victim whenever some leftist holds a press conference, because a victim helps to turn an issue from a complex public policy issue into a human issue. Don't overlook the human side of the story. You have to be on the side of people and not be solely perceived as being on the side of theories. Here are 2 recommended books, The Righteous Mind and The Light Switch. read both, and you'll be more powerful in the public policy arena. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. I'll be happy to help to participate in the Q&A at the end. So I throw it back to you. Thank you.
Ron, thank you so much. And look, I really appreciate you compacting that down as much as you could. We can see that you've got a lot of great content there. There will hopefully be some time for some Q&A at the end. As you mentioned, you've also got a breakout coming up later on. I highly recommend anyone that wants to hear more from you get into that, where you're going to have the time to really unpack it. We do also have the social room, and I don't know whether you might be able to make some time to be able to head in there and have a chat with anyone there that wants to have a chat with you any further about that. But without further ado,
Yes, it's an honour to throw over to Brittany Hunter to continue the discussion.
Yes. Well, I have to echo the sentiments that The Righteous Mind is a great book. Everyone should read it. But good morning. Thanks for joining us. For anyone unfamiliar with me, I'm Brittany Hunter, and I've been a part of the broader libertarian movement for what feels like forever now. But most people know my work from FEED, the Foundation for Economic Education, but I've also been published in a plethora of other places. When I was thinking about what topic I wanted to talk about with you, only one thing came to mind, and that was get your own house in order before you criticize the world, which some may recognize as one of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's 12 rules for life, but more on that in a bit. In my earlier days of libertarianism, I remember a hilarious meme circulating of Murray Rothbard with the caption, "I got 99 problems and the government is responsible for all of them." Now, this is, of course, a play on Jay-Z's song, 99 Problems, and the meme is hilarious, relatable, and also a little problematic when we look at it in a different light. So the state is, without a doubt, a destructive and formidable beast that exists at the expense of the individuals it claims to serve. It can be easy for liberty lovers to get caught up in anger and resentment for this apparatus, but if we aren't careful, our loathing will only consume us to a point where personal responsibility is lost in a sea of perpetual blame. And when this happens, we become no better than our opponents. As Nietzsche said, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes also into you. Now, continuing on this theme, in his book Liberalism, renowned economist Ludwig von Mises speaks of the spiral in which many socialists get caught. He writes, "Resentment is at work when one so hates somebody for his more favorable circumstances that one is prepared to bear heavy losses if only the hated one might also come to harm. Many of those who attack capitalism know very well that their situation under any other economic system would be less favorable. Nevertheless, with full knowledge of this fact, they advocate a reform, e.g. socialism, because they hope that the rich whom they envy will also suffer under it." So, plagued by resentment, the have-nots focus their energy on how they can take away from the haves, and this concentration on what they do not have turns into something much more sinister than just resentment. Fueled by hatred, these socialists begin to justify almost any action taken against their opponents, so long as it is committed in the name of sticking it to the rich. We've all heard this. So years ago, one of my colleagues, an incredible writer named Dan Sanchez, and I commented on the socialist phenomenon in an article for FEED. So we said, to these young revolutionaries, every frustration in their lives was someone else's fault. If they weren't getting the grades they felt they deserved, some bougie professor was to blame. If they didn't have the job prospects that matched their regard for their own intellects, it must be the capitalist system holding them back. Their tendency was to scapegoat class enemies, not only for societal ills, but for their own personal problems as well. Now, by shifting the blame to others, they relieved themselves of responsibility for their own problems. And I hope you can see where I'm going with this. They wasted their time and energy complaining, wallowing in self-pity, and seeking redress instead of taking ownerships of their own lives and fixing up their affairs. As a result, their frustrations only compounded. That's what happens. Now, when looking at this from the outside, it's easy for all of us to see the fault in this line of thinking. But the unfortunate reality of the situation is that many libertarians fall into the same negative feedback loop. So, instead of casting blame on the rich, obviously we don't do that, we make the state the scapegoat for all our problems. And often it serves only to diminish our own well-being and also our ability to be really effective in making change. Alexander Solzhenitsyn knew the evils of the state all too well. In 1945, while serving in the Soviet military, he was arrested for writing a letter to his friend, which was intercepted by government officials. Now, in the body of the letter, Solzhenitsyn had spoken critically of Joseph Stalin, an offense that ultimately got him thrown into a Soviet gulag. For nearly a decade, Solzhenitsyn slaved away in a labor camp and eventually developed cancer. Trapped in a freezing Soviet prison, he had every reason to curse the heavens for his bad luck and lose himself in despair of the situation. In fact, I bet any of us would have found ourselves in a similar situation we would have begun to unreservedly blame the state for forcing us to bear such a burden, and we really wouldn't be wrong in doing so. But Solzhenitsyn refused to get caught up in the blame game. Instead, he chose a different path. As hard as it may have been for him to maintain a positive outlook in the most dire of circumstances, he was inspired by the many people he was imprisoned with who refused to give in to despair and wallow in self-pity. Now, even though the state had committed this great act of violence against him, he knew there was no point in wasting his time blaming them. The deed had already been done at that point. He could not reverse his circumstances. There were really only two choices. He could either lose himself to, blame, or take control over the only thing he really could, which was himself. So terrible things happen to people every day, and unfortunately, many of these offenses are committed by the hand of the government. We all know this as libertarians. But when we choose to let anger brew and fester inside of us, we do ourselves a great disservice. Not only do we let ourselves become overcome with negativity, but we also miss out on channeling that energy into something really productive. We need to strive to do everything in our power to succeed in spite of the state. So we cannot give this parasitic entity the satisfaction of keeping us oppressed. In Solzhenitsyn's darkest of moments, he looked inward and asked himself how he contributed to his own suffering and what he could do to move past it. He strove to find good in the midst of evil because he knew his own well-being depended on it. Eventually, he was released from captivity, and he wrote the very famous book, The Gulag Archipelago. The book was one of the first of its kind, and that exposed the evils of communism and told of the history of the horrific labor camps the Soviets threw political enemies in, which a lot of people didn't know at the time. There was no internet, right? So rather than cursing the Soviets for the rest of his days, Solzhenitsyn did something productive with his experience. He created something important. We would be wise to follow his example. Most of us, hopefully, will not go through something quite this extreme, but there are still areas in our lives where we will need to look inward and self-reflect, and that is how real change starts to happen. So circling back to Dr. Jordan Peterson, a few years ago, he said, "My sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward, because you build your competence that way." Now, during an appearance on a Joe Rogan podcast, Peterson got into greater detail on how we can actually put this into practice and do this in our own lives. His advice is centered on the importance of fixing your own life before you can try to take on bigger tasks. And in regards to this, he said, "Don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with that at your own peril. Can you even clean up your room? No? Well, you should think about that. You should think about that, because if you can't even clean up your own room, who the hell are you to give advice to the world?" Now, when I first heard this a few years ago, it was a huge wake-up call for me. My literal and figurative rooms were not clean. And yet, as a political activist, I was arrogantly trying to fix something that was out of my realm of competence. I had to set to work fixing myself before continuing activism in any real true form. Peterson suggests that to do this, we start very small. We clean and fix the things that are closest to us first. You cannot run without first learning how to walk. And in order to be capable of great change, you have to first fix yourself so that you may take on bigger tasks. This doesn't have to be some grand gesture. You can start small by cleaning your room, or even something as simple as organizing a corner of your room, or even take that smaller, maybe just organize one drawer. Eventually, as Peterson says, you can take on bigger tasks. That's how we learn. Speaking to this effect, he says, and then maybe you'll learn enough by doing that so that you can fix up your family a little bit. And then having done that, you'll have enough character so that when you try to operate in the world, at your job, or maybe in the broader social spheres, that you'll be a force for good instead of harm. All this because you figured out how to master your own domain and get your own life in order before making it about anyone or anything else. And that is the takeaway I hope you get from this. Understanding the greater impact this could make. I mean, imagine what you could do if you got your own life in order. These seem like small things, but maybe by cleaning your room, you can get enough in order to inspire somebody else, or maybe get your life together enough to start your own business and create jobs. Maybe you could be more effective as an activist if you did all the work to fix yourself before you were casting stones and petitioning for larger change. But when we fail to do this, when we neglect personal responsibility for our own lives and instead focus on all the anger and on fixing other people, we set ourselves up for failure by default, and we become no better than the socialists Mises speaks of, to be brutally honest. The world right now is a scary place, and no one is immune from the perpetual blame game that is occurring on almost every facet of our political and social lives. But But the truth is, blame does nothing because we achieve nothing when we neglect to first look into our own hearts and change everything we can in our own lives before telling anyone else, be it the state or anyone, what to do. So in the words of Peterson, I will close once again with, get your own house in order before you criticize the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a fantastic point, especially about the opportunity cost of blaming others. All that time and all that energy we spend externalizing our problems and externalizing the responsibility for them is time and energy we could have spent actually fixing them. So thank you so much for that. Now, Julie, before we get to you, we've deprived you this year, or more specifically the Australian government and all the COVID restrictions have deprived you of your visit to Australia. How do you feel?
I'm very sad about it.
So are we. Well, Julie, it is great to be able to have you, even if only in digital form this year. Would you like to share with us what you've prepared?
Yes, I will. So right now I am in my car right now in my driveway because I have a toddler. Oh, you okay?
Sorry, yes, we just had a minor audio glitch at our end. I think everything's fine now.
Okay, cool. I am in my car in my driveway because I have a toddler inside my house. So this is kind of the life for a parent right now.
I have a 10-day-old at home, so I'm feeling your pain.
Okay. So now that we know how to influence people and how to fix ourselves, you may be saying, well, how do we reach people? Who am I supposed to talk to about these ideas? It's become easier than ever before to reach people via social media and the internet. I know a lot of people say, well, I want to start a YouTube channel. I want to start a blog. I want to start a podcast. I want to do all these things. But the number one thing they don't do is they never start. You have to start. That's the biggest thing I want to say. But people look at my YouTube channel and they say, well, you've been doing this for years. You have subscribers and all this. I have nothing. Well, when I started about a decade ago on my YouTube channel. I had none of that either. If you go back to my first couple videos, they're super, super embarrassing. I'm even more awkward than I am right now, believe it or not. But you have to start somewhere. I had no idea even how to upload a video. I was still living at my parents' house. I was in my early 20s. I had no tripod. I had like a flip cam. So you have to start somewhere. So you start your YouTube channel. For instance, I didn't know how to design shirts. I started a company designing shirts. I didn't know how to write a book. I wrote a children's book. So you have to start somewhere. That's my number one thing. And anyone can do it. And I know that sounds like cliche, like anyone can do it, guys. But really, if I can figure out how to do this stuff on the internet, you can do it. And you can win friends. You can influence people. So I want to I asked my Twitter, like, what questions do you have about starting a YouTube channel? And I think this also applies to starting a blog or a podcast. And especially now with the quarantine, I think we have a ton of time to actually do these things. So there's really no excuse if you're still saying, well, I may start a podcast someday. Well, you're not going to unless you start right now. So the question I got asked is the name of your podcast, the name of your blog. And this, I think, is one of the reasons people don't start, because they get stumped on, well, what am I going to call this? When I started my YouTube channel, I called it Token Libertarian Girl. And I was trying to say, okay, well, what sets me apart from everyone else in the libertarian community at that time? Oh, I'm a girl. But I think when you say you're a libertarian, people automatically have assumptions about you. Libertarian, well, I don't like libertarians, so I'm not going to listen to you. I think I decided to call my channel Julie Borowski because that's my name. And I think it gets more people like, what is this girl talking about? As opposed to automatically dismissing what I say. So there's a chance you can say, a libertarian, this, or you can go with your name. Now, of course, there's downsides to going with your own name. If you want a job in the future that's not political, if you're on a date with somebody, they want to Google you. So think about that. Maybe go with a nickname, or you can even make up a name or something like that. So I would advise you to still stay clear from the libertarian label because, like I said, people kind of have assumptions about that. And it's really important to, how will you be different? There's a lot of libertarian podcasts right now. So what is going to set you apart from everyone else? I use humor, I use satire, I use skits. I find that to be a non-threatening way to promote liberty. People don't automatically have like a knee-jerk reaction, get defensive about it, but figure out, what's your whole thing? How are you going to be different? What are you going to provide? I know there's like Punk Rock Libertarians as a podcast. They kind of talk about punk rock things, so that's kind of cool. That's kind of different. That's edgy. Find out what you're good at. People ask me, well, how do I get an audience? One way is to interview well-known people. And it can be hard to get those interviews. So networking is important there. But once you get the interviews, people will share it on their own platform. So it's kind of a cross promotion. I developed relationships with other libertarian Facebook groups. And I said, hey, could you share this link and I'll share something for you? So we both benefit that way. Nowadays, there's Facebook ads. If you want to go that route, well, you actually pay Facebook to promote your video, to promote your channel. There's also one thing I did, which I probably would not advise you to do, but just kind of telling my story. I would spam the crap out of libertarian Facebook pages with my videos. People kind of get mad about that because they're like, well, you're self-promoting, but it was something that worked to kind of get the word out. A lot of people ask me, well, how do I make money doing this? And to be honest with you, if your whole goal is I want to make money, this is not for you, okay? On YouTube ads, I probably made a couple $100 in total. So that's not obviously a good amount of money. So you actually have to do it for the right reasons. I think if you do it because you like liberty, you like spreading the message, maybe like for me, you like to make people laugh and, to make people feel good about themselves, automatically money will come from that. There is ads, like I said, but I wouldn't rely on that. Nowadays, there's Patreon, and there's other alternative sources where basically your fans can pay you. Of course, you have to get fans first, but there's also, merch I sell, there's affiliate sales, there's all kinds of ways to make money. But like I said, don't make that the whole point of your channel because people will see that, oh, you're just trying to make money, and they don't like that at all. How do you keep an audience? So one thing that I do is I try to respond to people. I try to develop a sort of a relationship there on my Instagram. For instance, I've tried to show a more personal side of me. So people say, oh, you're actually a person. This is a relationship we have. I know a lot of people, when they meet me, they think they know me. They're like, hey, Julie, we've met before. And it's like, no, I don't know who you are. You just seen me on YouTube and you think we have this relationship, which is actually kind of cool. But to develop this relationship, to respond to people, to show some of your personal life, to develop this relationship. And it's also important to consistently upload things. This is something I'm not great at, not at all, especially now. But if you actually want YouTube to promote your videos, you have to be a consistent uploader. Just putting that out there. A lot of people say, well, I want to actually spread the message of liberty as opposed to just talking to libertarians about liberty. One way I do it is I talk about current events, especially some, hot button issue, what everyone's talking about that day. So get people, outside the libertarian community say, oh, what is this person talking about? This so-and-so, whatever people are really outraged about that day. I've tried to do that where I kind of like sneak some liberty in them. I know I have a lot of conservatives who watch my videos, which is great. I try to not insult them. I think that was kind of like the first point of the presentation is, don't insult people. If you say, conservatives are stupid, liberals are stupid, well, they're not going to listen to you. And people have to like you and respect you, but most importantly, they have to think that you like them. One person I actually admire is Andrew Yang, and I know he's not a libertarian, but I feel like he does not hate me, so I will listen to him. So I think that's important when you're trying to get people to listen to you, say, oh, this person actually doesn't hate me. People ask me all the time about the haters. I have a lot of haters. I don't know why, because I feel like I'm a pretty pleasant person, okay? But how do you deal with haters? You have to realize that they come with a territory. when I first started YouTube for the first year or so, like, I didn't have any haters because I didn't matter. No one cared enough to hate on me. So when you get people who hate on you, you have to be like, wow, I'm really important. They're spending their day hating on me. So you kind of have to realize that comes with the territory, and to not kind of take it personally. You have to kind of realize that they are insulting this other person. I've tried to kind of be like, okay, they're insulting who they think you are. They're not insulting you. If that makes any sense. I don't know if it does or not. But I always try to keep my cool, because one thing I've realized is that when you are arguing with a hater or someone that doesn't like you, you are not actually arguing with that person. That person is probably not going to change their opinion about you or what you're talking about. What you're really doing is trying to get people who are reading the thread, who are reading the comments, to be on your side. So I try not to insult the person, even though deep down I really want to insult the person because they're stupid. I don't insult the person because it makes you look bad to other people, and I care about what the other people who are reading the thread, who may not be commenting, who may not be liking, who I want to get on my side. So it's not about the person you're arguing with, it's about other people. So it's good to kind of keep your cool and be humble. I think a lot of libertarians are kind of know-it-alls, and I definitely am a know-it-all, but I try to not be so much, because I think it's really important to be humble, to get people to like you and to realize, when you say, oh, I made a mistake. For instance, I've retweeted things that I realized that are not true later on, and I made a statement saying, hey guys, sorry, I retweeted this too soon. I should have looked into it. And people respect that instead of, saying, just deleting it and not saying anything, which is tempting. Lastly, I saw the 2-minute warning is censorship. A lot of people say, well, what's the point of starting a YouTube channel? I'm just going to get censored. I think I'm kind of not that edgy libertarian. I've never actually had a YouTube video removed from YouTube. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I'm not cool enough for that, but I've never had that experience. I've had my ads removed, which I think all political commentators have had, just because advertisers do not want to be connected to anything remotely controversial, which libertarianism definitely is. To not get your not get your video removed, I think you're probably clear as long as you do not say anything like anti-gay or that may be considered racist, which I know is kind of a broad thing right now. If you just talk about liberty, you're probably in the clear. So I don't think that's, well, why should I even start? I think that's a defeatist attitude to begin with. So thank you guys, and I will take any questions that you guys have. Bye.
Great. Well, Julie, I respectfully disagree on arguing with haters. That's one of my few hobbies. And anybody who follows me on @GideonC,
You've got quite a collection of them.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Some people collect fine wine. I collect fine trolls on Twitter. So check out @GideonC Rosner for more of that. And of course, I was always going to plug that at some stage. But look, we've got questions coming in thick and fast. But can I get the ball rolling? I was very taken by Ron's use of the PC versus Mac motif, and it's always fascinated me because, let's face it, the right isn't cool in the public eye, and that's very strange because the establishment these days is basically the left. All people, you grow up, your teachers are left wing, your parents are more often than not left wing. The government is left wing, or certainly pursues authoritarian, nanny state left wing policies. What can we do to short circuit our image as libertarians in general and the right in the libertarians in particular and the right in general to make ourselves more cool, or at least more fashionable, more approachable? So I'll throw it back to Julie on that one first.
How to make libertarianism cool? I don't know why you're asking me, of all people, how to make something cool. Like, the whole thing I said, it was like how to make friends. I'm like, I'm terrible at making friends. I'm not cool whatsoever. What I try to do is just to be myself. I think people kind of respond to that I am a regular person. I have a family, and I've tried to show that on Instagram. And I don't know how to make libertarianism cool. I'm a complete failure at that.
I disagree, and I think a lot of people would, Julie. I think you're being a little bit too humble there. I do want to add, though, if I may, something in handling trolls, and a realization that took me about 10 years to arrive at. I certainly don't have a following nearly the same size as yours, Julie, but the Australian political context is much smaller, and I've attracted my fair share of trolls. But I had this epiphany one day, and I realized it is not possible to say anything online and not attract hate. And the realization came with when I saw someone who had posted a photograph of the kittens that they had recently bought or something like that. And obviously a page of some sort had come in to attack, and multiple different people came in talking about puppy breeding or animal breeding and how wrong it was and how ownership of animals was wrong and blah, blah, blah. And just thought, here's this mum who's bought a couple of kittens for their children and she's attracting all this hate. That was the
animal enthusiasts can be very, very hateful people online, trust me.
And that was the epiphany for me. I realized you cannot say anything and not attract hate from somebody. And so when someone comes at you with hate, it's not a case of, oh no, somebody hates what I said. It's a case of, oh, well, there you are. I knew you were out there somewhere. Someone was going to be upset. Now I know where you are. And I think that's a mental trick that can be very, very useful. I love this panel because between Ron and Julie and Brittany, we've kind of had this beautiful continuation of the very high level sort of in principle approach that Ron brought right through to some of the really sort of in the weeds kind of specifics of how to actually get it done. But Brittany, I'd be really interested to share your thoughts and your experiences around the different audiences that you can find on different platforms, because I think some people really suit some platforms and some media of communicating, whilst other personalities and people might suit other things.
Yeah, and I mean, for people like Jordan Peterson and the whole intellectual dark web, they found their place on Twitter. That's where this is happening. And even though Twitter's kind of a vile place, I try to stay away from it. That's where you're finding pockets of truth. So that's kind of the only place. And I think free speech is I know it's a private entity. We can get into that later. But still, as far as whether that will last forever or not, people are cracking down. But I think Twitter has been a really good advocate for people like Peterson or people who are just speaking the truth. So more so than Facebook right now, I would say, for sure.
Now, Julie, you mentioned a couple of different platforms that you use. Obviously, YouTube is a big one for you. You've mentioned Instagram. Do you find that you suit certain platforms much better than others? And what would be your advice to people who are perhaps thinking about getting into this space and finding their feet and finding their platform?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a ton of different platforms. I like Twitter because I think you can reach a lot more people. On my Facebook page, I realized that I mostly reach people that already agree with me. On Twitter, I think it's kind of wide open, especially if you use hashtags, you talk about current events, like you get a ton of people from all kinds of different political backgrounds that you can talk to. And I kind of like that because I like engaging with people and discussing. I also am not a long-winded person, which I think is probably more suitable for Facebook. If you want to do paragraphs and essays about things, I actually like Twitter because it's very short, to the point. I'm a very to the point person. So I like Twitter in that aspect. I've learned to like Instagram. It's kind of hard to kind of promote liberty, but I think you can promote, more personal side, like I said. So yeah, it's kind of finding what you like. And I think not everyone is suitable for a YouTube channel. A lot of people don't want to be on camera. That's fine. I get it. It's weird. So find whatever you're good at.
I would use Twitter a lot more if their word limit was 1,400 instead of 140.
You just do a thread.
Oh, goodness, that would be a long thread.
I've got one for Ron if we have time.
Yeah.
It's coming from the audience. You mentioned leading as locally as possible. Do you think this tier of government, I presume meaning local government, is overlooked by libertarians who focus more on big national issues?
Oh, absolutely. I'll use my own county as an example. Here in San Diego County, California, which is the southwest corner of America, we have a population of 3 million people and 987 elected offices in San Diego County. And very often, many of these local government offices, particularly planning groups and water boards, will go to the left just because no one on the right runs for them. Yet, as a former school board member myself, every school board, fire board, water board, city council, mosquito abatement district, if we had them, is an opportunity to put limited government ideas into action. And that's where it's needed the most, because the government in Washington is thousands and thousands of miles away. But local government is right there in your face and right in your doorstep. And if your taxes are likely to be raised, or your property rights infringed upon, or your ability to open a business or engage in your profession affected, chances are it's local government that's impacting that. And that's why it's so important for people who share a limited government philosophy to not overlook that at all. We need far more people with a limited government philosophy running for local government office. And it's astonishing how often that people can win that office, sometimes just by filing the paperwork and not even having to run a campaign at all. It can be very, very powerful, and you can have a real impact.
Well, I don't envy anybody who has to sit on the local council, but I suppose we all need to take one. No, seriously, we do.
No,
the problem is, liberals, we tend to have lives and jobs and things to do rather than sit around and dream up ways to torment other people all day long.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ron, Brittany, and Julie. Thank you so much for giving us your time, your talents, and sharing with us some of what you know and some of what you've learned over the years. Very, very grateful to have you as part of our 24 hours of liberty.